right. We are back with another episode, another season two episode of FTK Over the Air. And today we have a really cool guest with a cool topic, which, Lynn, we want to have cool topics and cool people. And so we're grateful for Bert Lyons for joining us today. And Bert, let me read.
Yes, tell us about him and how his great accomplishments, because he's got a really cool background.
Yes, absolutely. And so Bert is the CEO and co-founder of MedEx Forensics. Mm-hmm. And so a little bit about MedEx, so we know how his background feeds into MedEx. So MedEx is a pioneer in digital file format forensics, which is a fancy term for figuring out the provenance and the structure and the information about a file. So that's cool. And so they deploy forensic parsing and analysis at the file format domain to comprehensively extract all existing data from digital files based on their binary structure. Now, that was a mouthful, but
right. What does that mean in English?
Yeah. So one of the cool things, and he'll talk about this in the episode today, we heard, they don't actually watch the content. They look at the actual structure of the file. So binary, they're down in the zeros and the ones. The hex would be a step up, but you get what I'm saying.
Yep.
They're down at the low level, analyzing the data to figure out where the file came from. Is it authentic? Has it been modified? What's the provenance? That sort of stuff. And so they've got a really cool setup for doing that.
So his company motto is revealing the truth in digital evidence. So they do, I mean, again, in layman's terms, they do video authentication, source identification, deepfake detection. Like those are their three big things. So we have some sort of video, photo, media. Is it real? Is it not real? Where did it come from? How did it come into creation, into this world, right? That's exactly what his company is tasked with doing.
And we're going to answer what is real.
Right. Like the fun part is what is real and not real when it comes to digital media. What is original video? What is authentic video? What is real video? What does that even mean? Are those three things three totally different things? Are they the same thing? Right? Like he's going to help us solve these questions. The other thing that's really cool about Bert that I love, that I totally nerded out on, is that he used to work as a digital archivist at the U.S. Library of Congress. This is going to make me sound like a real nerd, but I'm okay with it. I used to sit and watch every once in a while, C-SPAN, which right now I know you're thinking this is riveting.
That's
C-SPAN used to do these like live from the stacks at the Library of Congress. And they used to like go into some box, like deep down into the archives in the Library of Congress. And they would do like a live reveal of like opening the box. Like, you know how they do when they're like opening a tomb in Egypt? They would do it at the Library of Congress, and they would pull out some really old, amazing, government document from back in the 1800s. And it was so fun to watch. And yes, I get that now saying it out loud, that sounds really dorky. But he used to work at the Library of Congress doing digital archiving. And so, he's had a really, really cool career. And so he's taken those skills and transferred them into this new company that he has, to again, reveal the truth in digital evidence. Really cool.
Oh, 100%. And it may be dorky, but it's awesome.
Yes, totally awesome.
The C-SPAN stuff. We should go back through and do some facial rec on some old footage of those C-SPAN broadcasts. See if we can catch a glimpse of Bert.
Oh yeah, that's true. Sure maybe he was in. Oh, maybe I've known him my whole life and I didn't even know it.
Yeah.
So cool.
Man. Okay, so speaking of that, ripped from the website, Bert has over 20 years of experience leading consultants and development teams to create innovative, flexible, and user-centered software for clients where digital assets are a core function of their organization. And this comes back to that archiving, making sure that data doesn't fall off into obsolescence before we can recover that. In fact, we do talk a little bit about in this episode, even CDs and DVDs, how I don't think, like if you wanted a computer with an optical drive anymore, it's a special order, or you got to go on some site and buy a USB based drive or something.
Amazon. Got to go to Amazon. Yeah. No one has these devices anymore. It's so like it's wild that that technology to archive digital media is pretty much gone. I mean, from like generic public life, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've got discs laying around, and it's like, why do I keep these things? Like, I've got music CDs, and I don't even know. My car doesn't even have a disc drive, So it's like, who knows? What am I going to do with this?
Someday, the fall of civilization and everything gets built back up, you're going to be the DJ.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. With my USB-based CD drive.
That's right. Yeah, some of the other things we like to talk about in this episode, it was, like photoshopping is sort of the everyman's version of manipulating images, right? I mean, we've just seen things in the news with people getting caught out in the world of celebrity and even the world of the royals over in the UK of using Photoshop. Why are you using Photoshop? What were you doing? What was the purpose? And who did the Photoshopping? You guys also talk about when does Photoshopping go bad, right? I won't spoil it, but when is Photoshopping not okay in a criminal sense? There's a very fine line between I just want to make sure my hair looks nice in this picture versus I'm committing a crime and I'm fabricating evidence in order to prove, that I don't get caught, right? So it's a very interesting conversation of like, how does this whole synthetic creation of media, how does that play out ethically in the world, right? Where does that fit? So that was a good part of the discussion. I think the most interesting thing, and again, I'm not going to ruin it, but the most interesting thing is that he outlined that the existence of fake video and fake images and the fact that they're so good has completely changed the way that digital forensic examiners attack an investigation. So just the existence of the fact that these, fake videos and fake images are so good, it has actually completely turned around the workflow that forensic examiners have done for decades, right? Now they're all of a sudden having to make a big change. So you'll have to listen to the episode today to figure out what that big change is, and understand why examiners in this day and age are having to literally come up with a whole new workflow in order to make sure that what they're doing is still forensically sound. So interesting.
Oh, absolutely. So as we jump in, I'm going to close out the last little paragraph of his bio to kind of give him this big lead in. So because Bert has supported complex data and software development projects for these organizations that are spread all throughout the world. So you have the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Okay. So
that's a big one.
We've heard of that.
Kind of a big one.
Yeah. The Smithsonian Institution, another big one. Library of Congress. I've heard of that. JFK Presidential Library Foundation, HBO, Paramount Pictures, University of Kentucky, Indiana University, Yale University, Facebook, Spotify, and more. So, I mean, like, this guy knows data. So
it's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, he knows data, and he knows the structure of data. And again, the cool thing about this is about their technology and the way they're approaching it is they don't actually look at the content. It's all about the structure of the file. And I think that's pretty cool. So, Lynn, I think we should bring Bert on and see what he has to say about AI. And again, we've kind of teased a little bit of the nuggets through there, but I learned a lot going through this, and it's really interesting to me. So,
yep. It's always good news and bad news. Good news, you're going to have to change the way you're doing things because life is different. But bad news, you're going to have to change the way you're doing things because life is different. So Bert goes over that. Let's hear what he has to say.
All right. And now we're here with Bertram Lyons of MedEx Forensics. Bert, how you doing?
Doing great, Justin. Thanks for having me today.
Well, I appreciate you jumping on. I know it's been a busy day, and I'm sure the week is still stacking up for you, but I appreciate you taking this time out. But, just as we get started here, I was hoping you could kind of introduce us to yourself, to MedEx Forensics, you know, what you do, what they do, what you do together, that sort of thing.
Good question. Yeah, I'll start with myself. So yeah, I'm Bert Lyons. I'm the CEO currently and a co-founder at MedEx Forensics. But how I got there, I've spent my last 20 years in my career was as a digital archivist. I worked a variety of different digital archives around the country, but ultimately ended my career at the U.S. Library of Congress, where my job was, to be actually one of the first digital archivists hired at the library in the early 2000s. And really our job there was to interpret and understand digital information from a, let's say, from a level that didn't require dependencies to interpret the information. So our job was to be able to take in files and understand what it would take to be able to reproduce that information in the future, such that the Library of Congress could ensure that that information can live on. It being a large part of that documentation at the library being history of the U.S. government. So that was my job, and I spent my career there. And I'd say my expertise was really around digital file format analysis. So really understanding file formats at the bare minimum, how they work, how they encode data, and how that data can be extracted, and ultimately to understand the provenance of that data. How did it come to be what it is, at the moment that it is in my hand. So that I guess that's a little bit about me in a very, very quick nutshell. A little bit of fun. The fun facts there is that the first half of my career was at the Alan Lomax archive, which was Alan Lomax was a folklorist and a collector of music and video of people from all around the world from like the 1930s through his death in the early 2000s. He never stopped until he had to physically stop. And so his archive was awesome. It was just a massive collection of audio video formats from the minute that we could record from cylinders out in the field to acetate discs to wire recordings to acetate to paper tape to acetate tape, etc., all the way up. So I spent many years just really understanding how formats work at the analog level, and then had to migrate them to digital, and then at the same time had to learn these new digital formats. So it's just kind of always been something that I'm very interested in. How does information function? But anyway, that all ultimately led me to MedEx. We started working with the FBI in 2015, building out some training for that group, and ultimately led. And we can talk more about it shortly, but it led to the development of our company, MedEx Forensics, ultimately, where we're providing very specific video authentication and format analysis for law enforcement.
That, it's kind of interesting how important that becomes, and you don't think about it in the time, or I mean, maybe you think about it because it's your world, but like CDs as we were growing up and stuff, or a little while ago, that was the thing. Like everything goes on a CD. You'd buy those big spindles of the blanks so you could burn mixes or save your photos to. Now, my wife and I were like, we found a spindle of CDs, and none of my computers have disk drives. We have a USB one we had to dig out of the drawer.
Can't even play it.
Yeah. And so once we found this USB disk drive, to the point of, kind of archiving, my wife was like, we need to copy this off onto something before this drive breaks or, whatever. And
right. Yeah, man. The obsolescence of digital information is actually is moving much more quickly than the obsolescence of analog. We can still, it's still possible, although hard to acquire in a similar way, to grab analog information off of magnetic tape, etc. Although that's becoming more and more obsolete, but it lasted a lot longer than CDs, for example, which are now, like you said, because of the playback requirements to actually just read the pits off of those discs. It's if you don't have it, you're stuck. You have no option, zero option. Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Yep.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting, but that kind of as you said, that your company is working with that, figured out some interesting ways to do that. Because one thing you told me, and maybe you can shed some light on this, you don't watch the content or listen to the content. It's your stuff that does it.
Yeah, that's right. So while we're on MedEx, at MedEx Forensics, so we have this patented methodology and technology that we've developed. There's a few key points to it. One is we target automation. So being able to do authentication and provenance and source identification analysis at scale for digital video is one of the targets of our methods. So you got to be able to do, we can't, there's not enough time in the day for processing one file at a time. That's just, we're not there anymore. I mean, we do very well and very thorough processing of files, but we have to do it fast and we have to do it at scale. So that's one of the things that we do. The technology that we've developed, the IP, the patented side of it, is that we, instead of watching video, for example, or watching the content, and also instead of extracting metadata, which of course we do extract all the metadata from files, we don't actually watch the content. There's a third lens that we apply to digital video analysis and really just multimedia analysis, which is an exploitation of the internal structure of the file. So the complexity of a digital multimedia file is such that it requires internal objects to store different data points, and to kind of like a database, if you will, or like a file system. And so there's a sequencing of these objects within a file within the same kind of format. So an MP4 format has a flexible structure such that different encoders can use the same format, but sequence the objects inside of the file based on their goals. Whether they have different strategies for how they want to put that file together, they can. It's allowed by the formats. So we really leverage this, what we call internal structural. We call it structure, and it's really a sequencing of the internal structure of the file. And it's been a largely invisible lens to the forensic community up until now. There is no tool out there other than MedEx that will do this for you. Not only extract that structure, but then create a signature, and then furthermore compare that signature to known exemplars from thousands and thousands of devices and software, et cetera. And so that's what's unique about our approach and how we approach the question of authentication. And we're going to talk about some definitions shortly, I think. But how we approach this, reading and extracting every single bit of data, or squeezing every last drop of information we can out of a file. Both its embedded, readable metadata, its non-readable metadata, and its structure, and leveraging all of that in a total analysis of the file.
I like your use of the word lens, but I mean, you and I, we've met at a couple conferences, but what really kicked off my renewed desire to reach out to you, because I know that conference season was super busy, so we'd put this off, was your recent blog post on the new OpenAI video generation.
Right.
And in that you break down some of the analysis that you guys have done on each of those videos, which I found very interesting. And immediately I read that and I was like, I got to reach back out to him. I got to talk to him. But it was just interesting, the different things that you through your analysis, through your software, all the different aspects, the lenses that you look at it, all the information you were able to pull out of just those marketing images,
right,
or videos from OpenAI.
That's right.
Which kind of leads us into kind of the rise of AI and the new multimedia generation. How is that? I mean, this is a loaded question and a huge question, but we can narrow in. But how's that kind of impacting you and how you analyze multimedia?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there's obviously no doubt there's a massive rise in synthetic media generation from both the generative AI perspective, as well as from, prior to that, the GAN-based deepfake face swaps and other efforts to create false, if you will, or synthetic imagery. So that's been there. It's been growing. It's been accumulating. I think the entrance of generative AI has only complicated things in terms of the public's expectations of what kind of media they may encounter and how that media can be examined. So it's certainly what it's done for us. It's basically just added an entirely new layer of analysis that luckily, our type of analysis is one that's focused on describing provenance, describing the context of a file. Let me say that with some detail, describing how a file was created instead of describing what's true or false within the file. That's a tool like MedEx, a forensic tool like MedEx provides, is something more around giving the investigator or the examiner data points that they can use to add to their overall analysis versus telling the examiner or the investigator there's some probability of real or fake. So just coming back to how it's changed for us, what's really changed for us is that now instead of only using MedEx to do an authentication exam where we're trying to tell you what was the last piece of software that encoded your file, or what camera, if it hasn't been re-encoded and it is real or original to a camera, what camera, brand, and model created it. These are things that MedEx was designed to do. Also to look for manual tampering and has this file been manipulated in some way by some human, not using software. And now there's just this other lens, which is there a trace in the structural composition of this file that points itself back to one of these generative tools. And so that's what we've done. We track the behavior of encoders in our what we call our MedEx reference library. And so it's just added a series of exemplars that we have to generate. We generate them from Rephase, from Deepfake Webs, from Deepfaker, from Deepface Labs, from whatever it is. At some point soon, Sora, once that's released to the public. But anytime we can generate media directly from these tool sets, then we can document the behavior, we can store it, we can learn from it. And again, we're learning about the attributes and the structure of the file, not the content. We're not a content-based detection tool. So we're going to then, when we see a file in the wild, as you saw with the Sora analysis that I did, we're going to describe how it came to be. And that's going to give the examiner a lot of power in their investigation, ultimately. So, yeah, that's really how I think it's changed. One more point. I know another thing that it's really done is it's put a lot of focus socially on the questions that we've been trying to answer for years with our technology, which is authenticity of a digital media file. So it's becoming more interesting, not just to investigators and law enforcement and in court systems and insurance and journalism. It's actually becoming of interest to everybody, as you mentioned previously with the example you gave about the London Eye. Right?
Oh yeah,
everybody's has an interest now. Yeah, that wasn't the case a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. That was not. We were having to explain, as you probably saw us on the floor of conferences, even in the law enforcement community, what is authentic? What do you mean? What do you do? What do you mean you authenticate video? What does that even mean? So now we rarely get those questions at all. It's more like, okay, how do you do it?
Yeah, exactly. Right. Mm-hmm. One thing, two things. You'd given me some reading, given me some homework before we had prepped. I did ask for it. The interesting thing in the article that you sent me, Deep Fakes in the Doc, that was written earlier this year, or published this year, I did not know that it starts off with talking about audio-visual manipulation, and the first kind of recorded case of it was in 1869, which you said we've been dealing with it for a long time. That is not an understatement. We have, the first camera wasn't even released, a couple of years before that, really.
That's right.
10 or so years before that for consumer grade. And the guy, William Mumler, was taking pictures of people and then would double focus to make like a ghost image of their ancestors and would sell these photos. And so they charged him with fraud. I don't think they had laws for that at the time because he was acquitted. But, it's the evolution of this for sure. I think one thing that I thought of with that as well, and we talked about this, on another call we were on, as I was reading through the laws, at least in the U.S., about whether AI or artificial images would be counted as evidence in a criminal trial, say if it was CSAM content or something like that. It was like 1996, late 90s, early 2000s. It was rejected because the falsely created stuff, and this is a quote from the congressman. It's just not real enough. It
Right.
just, like, at the time there was a Final Fantasy movie, Spirits Within, that they cited as the cutting edge.
Right.
And if we watch that today, it's not even a good cart. I mean, I'm sure it's fine, but it's like, by today's standards, it's a average cartoon or whatever,
Right.
But that has changed now to where, if someone has taken their time with it, you almost can't tell, or maybe you can't tell.
Oh, there's some cases you can't tell them. That's one of the big challenges that we see in the law enforcement community with child sexual abuse material is that now we have examiners who have to spend quite a bit of time first determining, is it real or fake, before they can move on to, do I have a live victim? And there's a big know a lot of our colleagues in that community are extremely stressed with this, and looking for solutions as quickly as possible. Right. But yeah, going back to what you said, as long as we've had technology, people wanted to use it to create fakes. I mean, that's just always that, like you point out, like, that's just the case, right? As long as we've had all of these photographic and sound recording and moving image technologies, we like to use them because we're creative species in general, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we don't always use them for good. And the problem, and maybe this goes to a question, being creative and synthetic information is not bad by nature, right? It's the intent of the user or the creator that becomes challenging, and whether harm is then occurs with it, right? That we have to be, that is the most alarming. I think, like you pointed out, from a cinema perspective, it's amazing that we can have these technologies because we can have really exciting, creative, and cinematic experiences. That's not bad by nature, but
right.
Yeah, it's how humans want to wield this technology in their day to day.
It's another thing. The executive order on safe, secure, and trustworthy development and use of artificial intelligence. That is a long title, but it came out in October 2023. And in there, one quote that stuck out to me was, AI reflects the principles of the people who build it, use it, and the date upon which it is, and the data upon which it is built. And to your point, like, we make a movie, it's fine. It's very much not a non-biased, neutral thing because we have to feed it intel. And I would make the argument neither are we. We're nature nurture type people, but it, kind of building on what you said, it's not all bad. It's not all good. It's what people use it for.
Right.
And yeah. The other thing I wanted to point out, that something you said, you actually corrected yourself, and you said, whatever it was is real. And then you switched it and switched to authenticate or authentic. So if we could maybe talk, like, the nuance between real, original, authentic, how do those words play together when we're talking about AI content?
That's a really great question. We deal with that so often in how we train users of our tool, for example, to interpret results. And how we also, when we do our own exams, how we interpret results. But these also have different definitions. But in the context of what we do, I might look at something like original. If something's original, what does that mean, right? That's not describing the content, right? Original is describing, in some ways, the carrier, the thing that's carrying the content, if you will. Think about a image coming out of your camera, for example, on your phone. The file itself, once you create it, it's going to get stored in here on the file system. If we can extract that file immediately, we have this original file, right? It doesn't mean what you filmed was real. let's say you filmed a screenshot of a deepfake, or you filmed you and me having an altercation that was totally faked. We're friends, but we acted like we're fighting. Doesn't mean the content is that we could trust the content to be real in the way that we interpret it. But we can say that the file itself is original to the phone. It was created by the phone. It hasn't been changed since it was created by the phone. So the file is original to the phone. Doesn't mean that the content in that case is like that we can say it's real. So what does real mean? Real has to do with something related to how we it's really an interpretation of the content itself. Is it real? That's a harder one, right? Because that's sort of subjective. But ultimately, we'll come back to real in a second, because what I want to talk about is authentication, because that might shed some light on real. So when we talk about authentication, and if something is authentic, that process is not about real or fake or original or not original. The process of authentication is about proving or disproving a claim, right? So if we're going to authenticate something, a claim's been made about something, whatever that something is. Let's keep it in the context of digital video for the moment. If you hand me a digital video and make a claim about it, my task is to authenticate that claim, right? So the result depends on your assertion or your claim. If your claim is that this video came from Sora AI, then our task is to prove or disprove that. That's what authentication is, right? So then now I have this file. You said it came from Sora, from OpenAI, and we can prove or disprove that and authenticate it. And if we can authenticate it to be true, it doesn't mean the content is real or fake, or it doesn't mean anything other than we've authenticated your claim about the video, right? And then there's, of course, more things that are going to go into interpretation of the video. But we've authenticated that claim, or we've disproved it, So you think about authentication as a process of proving or disproving a claim about something. Original being sort of the state that something is in. And I feel like real, coming back to it, is more of like a subjective concept of, is something such that we can trust it to, to what we're seeing it says. Like maybe we can go back to you and me faking an altercation on video. Is that really a real altercation, or are we acting or not, right? So there's that kind of question. These are very different concepts, and I'm sure there are even more concepts we can add to that we often put in that same narrative around trust and synthetic and real and fake and original and authentic, etc. Does that answer your question? Or
yeah, and I think listening to that, it kind of really the answer that people want kind of depends on the question. Like, what do I need to know? Like you said, do I need to know, did a human create this, or was it just fed into AI with prompts? Well, okay, you want to know if it's authentic, I guess it's a combination. So right there, kind of like, right, what's the original carrier? But yeah, it is kind of the where you really have to think about it now, in that, what is it that I want to know? That's kind of, yeah, I feel like where it's at. And then the real, original, and authentic kind of come in to answer that in a combination of.
That's right.
Whatever.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. I mean, we always train folks that, people come to MedEx often and they think, oh, this is like a magic box. It can do anything, right? It can see the past. It can predict the future, right? Here, I threw a file at it. Why didn't MedEx know that this file, that I shared this file 5 times through 5 different platforms and then re-encoded it once and then changed some values with the hex editor? Why can't MedEx tell us all of that, right? That's an impossibility in any digital media, because there's no logs, there's nothing like that. So MedEx is like purely we're confined to kind of analysis that we do. We're confined to the walls of the file, and so what we want to do is tell people that, all right, what can we tell you about this file to answer your question about, to help you answer your question about it? But ultimately, it really depends on what question you're bringing to the table, right? And how realistic it is to answer that question based on the piece of evidence that we have in our hand today.
Yeah, and then comes the really hard part is what action are you going to take based off of that
Right,
information?
right. And what other information do you have to triangulate it with? And
Yeah.
overall, there's the totality of an investigation. You have access to lots of different data points, and that you want to put them all together.
I think that is a key takeaway, because I feel like we've kind of lived through this era of, if I have a picture of it, then that's pretty good. Like, hey, this whether it's a fake altercation or real altercation, here's this thing recording this happening.
Mm-hmm.
And we're kind of moving now into an era where, yes, okay, great, the video, but were there any eyewitnesses there at the place as well that can show Bert and Justin hanging out, eating a burger together right before this happened, or whatever. And so we're moving into, yes, you have the picture, but what else?
Right. Need more.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think institutions like groups such as the Coalition for Content, Provenance, and Authenticity, the C2PA, and their Content Authority Initiative kind of thing, I don't want to call it a codec, but it's a system.
Schema.
Do you think these will have long-lasting impacts on this issue in that it can help, or do you think we'll always have the issue as well?
I mean, the issue will always be there for sure. Even once you implement something like C2PA, everything's based on a trust model. So we're always trusting something or someone, and that model that something or someone can always be attacked, right? So we always have this analysis. But groups like the Content Authenticity Initiative, which then sort of supports the C2PA schema development, are putting new technology into place, which is only going to help in some way or another, right? They're creating a ecosystem-based approach to assigning provenance data to content as early in the process of its creation as possible. So, and then trying to keep that information associated with the content as far as they can into the life cycle of that content, such that publishers of that content can illustrate or demonstrate the data for the end user, right? So they're trying to create, I say ecosystem because you have to think about creation, you have to think about editing, you have to think about re-encoding for whatever happens on the web, you have to think about the actual UI to then extract and use that data if it's present. So you have a lot of different players who are going to have to come on board for this to fully succeed. There's a lot of possibility for that to happen. You have big players like Adobe leading the charge. You have Microsoft and Google involved. You have camera manufacturers like Canon involved. There's a lot more that have to come on board for this to actually succeed, because like I said, it's really an ecosystem approach. But what it does is it gives us tools, at least, for good actors to make good decisions, right? It gives us, that doesn't exist right now. There's no way, if you really want to make sure that you're sharing content that can be authenticated by somebody or proven to be exactly what you report it to be, there's no way for you to really do it today, except for just stating on your post or wherever you publish this thing, hey, this is what I did to create this file. There's no technological mechanism outside of you for that to happen. And so what they're trying to do is generate this ecosystem that is built around trust and cryptography and certificates, kind of like the web works. Exactly like HTTPS works, right? So we trust a lot of websites because they've got certificates that are, that we can say they've been validated to be who they say they are. This is the same kind of thing. Software and things will get validated to be who they say they are, or hardware. And when they create files, they'll sign those files. And then if the ecosystem knows C2PA, then when they see that data in a file, they won't re-encode the file in such a way that they lose that data. So there's a lot that has to lock in place for this to really work. But it's you got to try something, and the goal here, I think the real target here is driven by the fact that companies like Adobe, who want this to exist, are also want to create tools that allow people to create AI generated imagery and video, right? They already have it in Photoshop, and you can already do generative fill. They just released the mobile version of Adobe Photoshop or whatever that it's called last week that puts generative fill in the mobile devices of millions and millions of people worldwide. So, they're increasing the creative capacity of humans. So they have to act, I think, on the flip side of that and saying, well, at least let us make sure that we can try to protect other humans from that data as it goes out of our software. And so they're working on the C2PA and like trying to build some specs that will allow that data to exist. So if you create a file, do generative fill in an Adobe product today, you're going to get C2PA data in your file. The ecosystem's too weak right now to make sure that thing exists, because what happens is if you open it up as a JPEG and immediately, resave it as a PNG on some other photo application, that C2PA data is gone, right? So the content lives on without it. And so they're of course trying to add some three-legged stool approaches where you have cryptographic metadata, you have watermarking, you have perceptual hashing, anything that we can do to lock all this down to say, look, there's more than one way to validate the content in this file, specifically that it came from generative AI more than anything, or that it didn't, that it came from a camera and it's original and hasn't been significantly altered.
Do you think, and this may be a bad comparison, so if it is, let me know, but like earlier you mentioned how the AI conversation is kind of filtering down to everyone. Like you don't have to be an expert now. It's kind of become part of the everyday vernacular. Yeah. When we think about like information embedded in photos and stuff, I think like EXIF data.
Right.
Was there a similar slow pull for EXIF data, or I feel like there's some uses to the everyday person that comes with EXIF that kind of motivated manufacturers and software providers to preserve that data as it moved through. But again, if you converted it to PNG, it would wipe. But are we seeing similar adoption patterns between something like EXIF and something like the C2PA, or do you think it'll accelerate as more and more people understand the complexities of AI generated content or just attribution in general?
That's a great question. I'd add XMP metadata to that as somewhere in between EXIF and C2PA, where Adobe worked to develop this extensible metadata packaging that could go into media files coming out of anything. Originally it was Adobe and they open sourced it to be able to track what happened. In some ways XMP was a precursor to C2PA, largely for JPEGs, largely built from the camera industry and the journalism industry to be able to ensure that certain data could be consistently written into JPEG files, such that data could then, it's in the same way, make it through these pipelines. But again, what did you need? You needed software. You needed anything that was going to interact or re-encode a file in any way, shape, or form to know and to care about EXIF. You also need that for XMP. You're going to need that for C2PA. And anything in the system that doesn't causes a break, right? The minute that file gets re-encoded by something that doesn't follow the rules, and this happens with EXIF and XMP today, everywhere. And so those efforts, while widespread, never made it fully widespread. And unfortunately, social media platforms never picked up on any of them. Social media platforms recreate new files and don't bring that data forward. And that's been a huge challenge for forensics specifically, but for everybody. And now we're facing the result of that. Now the largest media providers in the world are social media platforms, and they don't persist any of this data. So they're going to have to get on board with C2PA for this to work, right? They're going to have, in the way that they didn't get on board with EXIF and they didn't get on board with XMP, they're going to have to get on board with C2PA for it to work. And ideally, they go back and get on board with all three, right? Because there are lots of files that'll never make it to C2PA data, but do have EXIF or do have XMP data in them that has provenance information that's just getting totally laundered day in and day out from social media applications on devices, on computers, and then on the web.
Given how impactful social media now is on politics and policy and decision making, it's almost like everything else can lag behind. They need to be the first ones on the platform.
They've got to. They got to be. That's our target when we go out and try to really discuss strategies for improving this challenge for the general public. It's the entry points for social media that are the targets. Like, that's the largest amount of media that gets out to the public eye comes through these very controlled entry points of social media platforms. I mean, there's some people like to say, it's not their responsibility, but I think it's significantly their responsibility to do something at those endpoints prior to normalizing and laundering files.
Absolutely. Even if it's, the misinformation campaigns and stuff, that's obviously can cause catastrophic issues. There's some examples in those articles you sent me.
Right.
But also victim information or victim data being transferred around. And you would think they'd be on board, because I know Facebook has experimented with various things for identifying exploitation and revenge porn and that sort of stuff that's been transferred on their things. But this would, I would assume, help in the automation and detection and removal of that content.
That's right. So. Yeah, purely don't miss these data points. Make sure they go into the pipelines before they're gone. You don't have to expose them to the public. Don't have to invade anyone's privacy, but definitely don't drop these data points and not use them in your content moderation pipelines, right?
Yeah. That was one of the key points to some of the C2PA presentations, the TED Talk by Sam Gregory,
Yep.
Is that they want to know how, not who. How did this content come to be?
Right.
Not necessarily who created it.
That's right.
And the knee-jerk response might be, well, wait, criminals and stuff. But you also have journalists, and you have, more, we'll call it, less free parts of the world.
Right.
That, we want to help show the authenticity of the content, but we don't want to rat out Bob and he ends up in a prison cell or worse,
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's not for the general public to worry about who, but how. Like an investigation of an actual incident, the law enforcement community has the ability to figure out who, and they're not going to expose that. They already have protocols for that, right? I think the key is like we need that exists, and that's not going away. But we need, as we build tools for the general public, right? They don't need to know who, but they do need to know how, so they can decide how they want to interpret the information, right?
So, kind of piggybacking off of this conversation of the systems in place and authentication, how do we maintain that? What's kind of the legal landscape right now as it pertains to, this may even kind of move outside of AI modified content, because we still have, ways to manipulate video outside of AI.
That's right.
What's kind of the legal landscape as far as manipulated content in the various kind of verticals?
I mean, like I was talking about earlier, I think the biggest, like the key is about harm, right? And intent when it comes to the legality of something. And so we're always, there's nothing inherently bad about using a Photoshop. I mean, the Princess of Wales just yesterday apparently photoshopped, TBD on the proof of that, but apparently photoshopped some of her family photograph and sent that out. And is there anything inherently bad about using a tool like that to clean something up? No, definitely not. Like, people do that all the time, but it's when something's harmed. I think when there's a harm in place that the legal field cares about it. And that harm could be a couple of things. We see it in our world. The harm could be as you mentioned earlier with, child exploitation, where you have an actual person, a young human who's being harmed, maybe in a physical way, maybe purely in an identity way. Depends on the nature of what's happening, but they're being harmed. So there's a legality there, and then the creation of that media content is what's causing that harm and how it was created. So we care about it there. There's also the misleading element of media. We see a lot of alibi videos that are faked, for example, a date's changed, or Photoshop's used heavily for that kind of stuff, or metadata's changed. The intent there causes a harm. It's a misleading fact that is damaging to an investigation, right? It's like giving a false alibi, right? So I think the legal landscape is largely the same and hasn't changed too much in this regard, other than the goal. There's a stronger focus on the media, on the evidence itself, especially when it is digital media. I say prior to recently, you can admit, and my colleague Brandon's a much better spokesperson on this than I am, but I'll regurgitate some of the things. But you can admit, the admission of this evidence in the court, it was largely someone saying, yes, I acquired it. I can vouch for it. Or yes, that's me in the video. That's what happened. So it's a person validating or authenticating the content, right? And that person's word is what matters. And then the evidence just comes into court. I think now that there's an understanding that more sophisticated analysis can be brought to bear to this kind of media, such that the question can be complicated. And so on both sides of the aisle in a court case, now you have folks who know that they can push a little harder on this evidence. We're starting to see that happen a lot more. I don't think that'll change. I think that'll just increase.
And I know some states, at least in the U.S., which is what I'm most familiar with, is like for child exploitation and CSAM content, it does have the wording content that depicts,
right,
which kind of gets you out of the kind of I don't know, the unfortunate history of, if it's not a person, then no one was, right. There's no victim. And hopefully we can move to more of that wording in the future, because help control that content.
Yeah, for sure. And that's a state by state decision. So you're seeing different states making different determinations on how they want to write laws and policy around that. That's a good point. There's a lot of push towards making it a crime to create synthetic media that depicts children, for example. Not just requiring it to have a live victim. But some states are still, you have to have a live victim, and they haven't quite caught up to that.
And that was going to be what I was going to say. It's, from the good aspect of AI, it's great that it's moving so fast. Possibly harmless thing is how Tesla has moved off of coding every possible thing for automated driving to just feeding it hours and hours and hours of good driving videos and kind of saying, go ahead. But on the legal side of it, our governments and our policymakers, and this is both good and bad, don't move at the speed of technological innovation.
That's right.
And I know I've bookmarked it. I haven't read it yet. Washington State, where I'm at, just passed an AI-based policy / law. Again, I haven't read the details of it, but for the last year, AI has been the hot topic, and they finally got the thing in, and what's going to change in the next, few months, and so on and so forth. It's, I think from the legal aspect, we're always going to be playing kind of that catch up,
Yeah, that's for sure.
How do we manage that? And that's been around for a long time. Shifting gears just a little bit, one thing I wanted to ask you to maybe define, and it was a term that I kept coming across in these articles, is deepfake versus cheap fake. Even though I think the population is becoming more familiar, or is familiar with deepfake, I think if we could spend a second talking about a deepfake, and then what's a cheap fake, and how do those two relate?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. People must remember, last year or the year before when the Tom Cruise deepfake videos were out on social media. Do you remember those? It
Yeah.
was his act. It was a stunt double for Tom, but they trained the model to really depict Tom's face, and it was the human actor was someone else. But man, it was tough. You could watch it, and it was tough to tell. Right? Deep
Yeah.
fake is where you have the scenario where you just can't tell. You can eventually find some things, but it's tough. It's high quality. Hundreds of thousands of dollars went into those videos. Right? These are expensive things to create, and it's not that easy to do it, especially to do it such that you and I could sit there and watch it and just be, you know, blown away in some ways by the ability of that particular piece of software. Um, so deepfake is largely it's not really a type of technology; it's the quality of the fake, if you will. Whereas cheap fake, we probably all use tools like Reface or something on your phone. I don't know what tools are out there these days, but there's tons of these apps that don't employ very sophisticated models. They're not very expensive or often just free, and they just give you a quick, cheap thrill. Right? I'm put my face on this video of someone dancing in the sand, and they do a decent job, but it's clearly cheap. It's clear. You look at it, you're like, all right, that's cool, it's funny, but that's not real. I know it. There's no question about it. I don't have to look any further. So really, the cheap fake versus deep fake difference is that it's not necessarily which software you're using. It's really the quality and the overall outcome of the product that we're talking about here. And so we started out years ago. There was a ton of cheap fake stuff out there, and people building up to the ability to create these more deep fake approaches where it is difficult. You cannot tell the difference visually. You really need some kind of algorithmic approach, or some very sophisticated approach, whether it's forensic or algorithmic, to ultimately give you the evidence that it's not.
I think my worry is, as these things progress, and this is how it always is, but that the cheap fakes are gonna every year they're gonna look better and better and better.
That's right. They won't be cheap anymore. Oh, they'll be cheap,
Yeah.
but they'll be pretty good.
Yeah.
And you can see that happening for sure. There's a lot more options out there, but to create a real challenging, like even you look at the synthetic media. So now coming back more to Gen AI stuff. On the image side, they've gotten really good. You can generate imagery that's quite beautiful, and can be quite difficult to tell. Video, you can't. It's still not there yet. Even the Sora stuff, we're talking about 30 seconds of video that gets created. It's slow motion. It's obviously fake. It's obviously synthetic. Even though it looks beautiful and real, it looks realistic. Just the motion and the. So we're still a ways away from creating like a video of like you and me talking that has this, like, from a synthetic point of view. People can work from face swap techniques to try to make this conversation look like it's two different people, and we can get that can be pretty good. It still takes a lot of time. You got to train on your face and my face, and it takes a lot of work, but you can do it. But for the Gen AI to create this, we're still ways away from that. I mean, as fast as it's going, maybe we're a year away from that, but we're not there yet. It's not a worry yet on the video side. On the image side, it is a worry. There is synthetic media coming out from tools that make it really difficult for trained examiners to tell if it's a real person or not, for sure.
Well, some of these articles talked about, a lot of these cases, it was politicians saying that it was deep fake or AI generated, and then no, it wasn't.
Right.
But the interesting thing reading through this and other things is the response might be, well, yeah, but we have MedEx and we have these other examination processes that we could do to determine whether or not the video is fake. But with our current news cycles and stuff, the fix or the redaction or the whatever, it's almost too late.
Yeah,
You know,
that's a good point.
and
Right. We don't have time to do the analysis to correct the problem before it's already out there and millions of people believe it. And a week later, someone says, "Oh, that was fake," but that's already moved on. Right. We're moved on to
yeah,
the next news cycle. Yeah,
yeah.
that is a challenge that we have for sure.
We've kind of been looking at it from a law enforcement kind of political, sometimes, you know, dabbling on that. What about from a like a corporate standpoint? Are we seeing similar issue, or not? Maybe not similar, but are we seeing issues in the way that it impacts kind of that environment, that industry?
We're seeing so there's a lot of movement in the KYC, like know your customer, know your crew arena, where corporate security really has an interest in reducing any kind of fake media coming in to infiltrate in any way, shape, or form. So whether it's like whether you're signing up for something and you have to present yourself on a screen, they want to stop the ability for me to play back a video on that screen. Like, how do you know it's really me? So it's this kind of identity need, because a lot of our interactions, especially post COVID, are like this, you know. And so corporations specifically are trying to protect themselves from being faked with this kind of live video, live audio scenarios. So that's a big challenge, and there's some organizations playing in that field. One of our colleagues, a company called Sensity, which does a lot of work. There's a lot of them out there, and you know, and they really provide, you know, almost like deepfake detection for live streaming, if you will, like live streaming of video, live streaming of audio, and and so corporations are wanting to run these kinds of detection algorithms, which are largely just they're just looking at signal content, images or sound, and they're flagging for possibilities of synthetic generation of that, or fake faces or synthetic imagery. And it's purely a security need. And then on the flip side, you also have like fraud and this kind of stuff on the insurance side. The insurance and banking corporations have a challenge with being worried about fraud when it comes to claims. Someone's claiming something happened. How does that claim get generated? Usually a video is sent in or a photograph is sent in. This happened to my car. My roof fell off my house. Now it's easy to fake that, right? So these corporations have that need for sure.
I didn't even, thinking about all the other stuff, I didn't even think about fraud. That's because, I mean, technically you do that with Photoshop, but I feel like this brings it to the masses, right? Is basically what it is. And kind of a tangent, but that concept of, the Apple AirTags, that all of a sudden when the Apple released their AirTags, it was all about stalking and violation of privacy. But there had been those types of things. I can't even remember the name now. That's how much AirTag had taken it over. But, there had been an Android Apple version of that for a long time, many years. But it's the Apple effect that once it comes to the general population, the less tech savvy,
right,
the utilization goes up. And I think that's where, yes, technically you could Photoshop damage to your car or whatever, but that took Photoshop knowledge, and you had to own Photoshop and all this sort of stuff. Now you can feed an image to, Bing Image Builder and
right.
say,
show me my house without a roof, please. Thank you.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Put a tree through the roof of my house. Yeah, exactly. Those kinds of things. It's just like that. Now you got to file and bring it back around. If you don't have these organizations embedding cryptographic signatures like C2PA or watermarks in these images, so if that's not coming out of the platform, then there's no hope. No, there's hope. There's hope. But it's much harder then for the recipient on the insurance side to make a decision about real or fake, right? They're purely trusting their eyes, and and whatever detection mechanisms that they've bought into. So I mean, that's exactly where you get this impulse to say, all right, well, let's attack every angle we can. Let's create some things that make it harder for that kind of fraud to occur.
To that point, Sam Gregory in that TED talk, he said, "Prepare, don't panic."
Right.
And he gave 3 things that need to happen so that we can kind of be prepared or be a little more set up. It was first, the detection skills and tools need to be in the right hands.
Right.
That we talked about that, but it's not quite there yet, but it's happening. We need to understand the recipe for content provenance. Where's it coming from? And that goes into the C2PA stuff as well. And then accountability and a pipeline of responsibility was the third thing he said we need to build. And that comes back to, he called it provenance infrastructure, and you called it the ecosystem approach.
Exactly.
Is how we're going to prepare, not panic. And to your point, so that, insurance people, I know they're not everybody's favorite,
right?
But businesses being able to function accurately is good for everyone net.
Yeah, it is for sure. And it's not just insurance that this is going to be a problem for. Right?
Yeah.
We're seeing it all over. And more importantly, it's like the general public, scams against the general public, that this is only another tool for that. And more importantly, like efforts to persuade or misinform the general public by certain groups is a challenge, no matter what where they're coming from. If the intention is negative and the information is false, then it's an unfortunate thing for humans to have to deal with, right? So we're just increasing the possibility for those kinds of things to happen with this technology. But on the flip side, like you said, we're all actively, there's and I know that our company is very focused on that. From a forensic point of view, we want to make sure our output is usable in court, but there's plenty of other companies out there who are focusing on detection, and they're not so much forensic focused, but they're more about, running models that try to detect, the evidence from a visual standpoint of some kind of an issue. And so, and that's also happening in the audio world. There's audio detection platforms out there. There are image-based. Of course, there's text-based detection. I don't know if you're aware, but like there's even tools out there now that will read text and models that will give you some probability of whether the text was generated by AI or whether it was written by a human. And they're not bad at it. They're pretty good at it already. They're just starting it up. But there are companies out there who have those models, those detection models running, so you give them some text, cut and paste some text from wherever you want, and they'll give you a score. Did a human write that, or did something like ChatGPT write that?
The universities were probably funding that one.
Oh yeah,
that
as quick as possible.
Yeah, it is interesting that you say that, because a coworker and I, one of the things that we noticed is that ChatGPT loved to use the word delve, and like, who uses? Delve. Somebody might use the word delve, but not often.
Not often, right?
Yeah, just kind of to wrap up, because I appreciate your time and I know you're busy. But one thing I wanted to ask you, kind of as not necessarily as a conclusion, but I think that's where we're at. If you had to, what do you see as the future of kind of this area? Not just AI, but general multimedia attribution. And I mean, it involves AI and the modification using computer tech and other things. What kind of do you see as the future problems, the future benefits, and how, we're going to tackle it?
Man, that's a tough question, Justin, to end on.
I guess if you knew that, you'd be retired by now and living on a beach.
Man, I mean, what can I say other than I think that we're going to increasingly have very detailed generation tool sets in the hands of the masses. That's not going to change. That'll increase. We will be of course, as multiple societies across the globe be trying to reduce harm from those, but also to enjoy them. I think that's what humans like to do, right? So that's not going to change too much. And so, in order to reduce harm, we're going to be building as many techniques as we can. Whether that, I think we're going to be doing it in a variety of ways. I know that we come at it from a forensic investigative perspective. We're going to be looking at evidence as it is. There are tools that are going to continue to try to fight against, do the back and forth with synthetic media, to learn their model, to be able to detect it, and then it'll get better, and then they won't know it anymore, and they'll have to learn it. So we're going to see that arms race for sure of AI based detection versus AI based creation. That's not going to stop. Governments are going to have to get involved, and they already are globally, to establish policies and laws and regulations. So I see all of that happening. I don't see it, but I would love to see it. I think all the big social media players have to get involved in this and have to take it seriously and have to learn some literacy around how digital media works. One of the big gaps that I don't know how it's going to happen, but I hope to see it happen. I was on a call with the Museum of Sound and Vision and the Institute for Sound and Vision in Holland yesterday. They have an education department, for example, and they're working on, digital ecosystem literacy, right? Not just digital literacy, but how does information move around and how's it changed and affected? At which point do we need to learn as consumers of that kind of information where our trust lies and what might have happened to something? That's largely I feel like that's largely absent. I think a lot of people feel like that's largely absent. We've done a lot in society to increase digital literacy, but I don't think there's a big digital ecosystem literacy. I don't think people recognize how data changes, the back end of the internet and the back end of their phones, and just how everything works. I think that the more that we can get that literacy out there, and that's training the next upcoming generations, right? So they understand that more than previous generations is probably really important. So education has to ramp up, and I think it will. I think the biggest strength we have against how to trust digital media is education. I mean, I think tools and technology is great, and we're going to always build that. But the smarter people are, and the more in tune people are with that, the better we'll be. So I don't know. I guess I don't see some huge change. I think we're all waiting to see what in the world's going to happen with these AI companies that are like OpenAI that are building these massive, LLMs out there that are just getting smarter and smarter and smarter. So I think in some ways we're all waiting to see where that's going to land, right? To have a better sense of what the next decade's going to look like. But
we're still on the cutting edge. I think still at the beginning of that.
Yeah, so. And it's moving fast. So yeah, I think from our perspective, I'll answer from MedEx's perspective. We're going to keep doing the best we can to document how digital media is created, and we'll be there to flag that for sure. That won't stop. As long as files exist, at the moment that file has to get written, and that's where our strength lies. So something has to encode the file at the end of the day.
Sure. And like we talked about, if that's a big part of the question, big part of the answer to the questions people will be asked.
Right.
Is where did it come from? What was the container?
Right. What was the
problem? And then they can be left up to decide whether it was real or true.
Exactly.
For sure. Well, Bert, hey, again, thanks so much for taking time out of your week to sit down. Like I said, I took like 3 pages of notes just from the reading you gave me, and another page of notes just listening to you. It's cool stuff.
Okay.
It's just always something new in the multimedia space, which I feel like for a while it kind of was a shrugged at artifact,
right?
But really, there's I especially I keep coming back to your lens term, and I think we've been ignoring the third lens that you mentioned for a long time.
Right.
So I think a lot of a lot of cool stuff's going to happen and interesting stuff with investigations coming soon. So.
I agree. Yeah, and thanks, Justin. I appreciate you taking time to talk to me, and I couldn't agree more. There's a lot more that we're going to be doing in the digital forensics community. We've attacked file systems as a community for years, and now I think we got to push further and further into the files. And we're great with databases, but there's still a plethora of data in file formats themselves that we can get better at investigating and understanding correlation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, and have a great week.
Yeah, you too, man. Thanks.